Hey y'all. About a month ago, I was looking at my archived Trello pages, and I rediscovered something that I completely forgot about. About 4 years ago, I made my own copy of the Greenville Revamp Progress Trello, and it has basically every single car that they were making at the time. I know that a lot of people have already made these types of videos, but there are a lot of cars on here that I couldn't find anywhere else. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and check them out, firstly starting with the fictional vehicles. So first up is the 2017 Agnér Tormenta. Now this was actually finished at one point, but here are some pictures of it when it was yet to be put on a chassis. The reason it was scrapped is that the devs were actually worried about adding high-performance hypercars and even ultra-luxury cars like Maybachs at the time. This was way before Bluezilla deprecated all of his cars. It was honestly a really good design and I wish it was added. Next up is the 2019 WM Shark R and XR. If you're familiar with the Sergel Classic, you might be wondering, okay, what's the difference? But if you take a look at the rear pictures, you can clearly tell that this is not your normal Sergel. This was the shooting brake version of the Sergel, which is basically a 3-door station wagon version of a coupe. As a huge wagon enthusiast, this would have been extremely cool to have, and I really wish it was added. Next is the 2019 WM Snake XR. Now this hot hatchback was a predecessor to the Western Taypan that's already in game, and to be honest, I actually prefer the looks of this over the Taypan. This was among the better WM designs of the time, and I wish they added it at the beginning of the revamp. And next is an extremely high-performance version of a WM that actually made it to Greenville. It's the 2020 WM Kaiju XA65 Hypersport, as if the Kaiju wasn't fast enough already. In BeamNG, it was originally called the WM Godzilla, but Blue changed it due to copyright reasons. If the Kaiju wasn't already badass enough, this thing came with hypercar performance, a giant wing, and a set of teeth in the front grille reminiscent to old fighter planes. Next is a police car variant of the previous car. It's the 2020 WM Kaiju XA65 PPIU, and I have no idea what PPIU stands for. Performance Police Interceptor Unit? Doesn't matter, but it had the same performance and cosmetic enhancements as the regular XA65, so this would have been able to catch up to just about any hypercar in Greenville at the time. According to the Trello, they were actually planning on making this limited. From what the description says, it looks like they were actually thinking about making police cars free if you had the state patrol pass. That would have been cool. Now we have yet another police car variant of a WM. This time, it's the 2020 WM Protogen PPIU. The Protogen Classic actually did come to Greenville, but they're extremely hard to find now. I found one in a public server last year and asked to review it, but they were extremely rude and they ended up selling it because they thought it was ugly, which still angers me to this day. I wish I had read the description of this before making a stupid guess as to what PPIU could stand for, but it stands for Police Pursuit and Intercept Unit. Wasn't close at all. By the way, if you or someone you know has an original Protogen, please comment down below, because I would love to film a review of one, as I have not seen one of these in over a year now. Many people thought that the Kaiju was the high-performance version of the Sergel, including me, but it was actually this. It's the 2020 WM Puro XA Ultrasport, and this actually was in GV3 and can still be purchased in the final release, but its name was the Sergel XA. I'm not sure why this was never added, but it would have been neat if it was. Those are all of the modeled fictional cars, but as some of you know, all Greenville fictional cars used to be made in Automation, which is a car company tycoon where you can export your final products to BeamNG Drive. There were several of these that never actually were modeled for Roblox, but they were actually planning on adding them, so let's go ahead and check those out, starting with the 1972 Urban Outlaw SR. Now this would have been really cool if it was added, as there was a major lack of classic muscle cars at the time. It's highly reminiscent of the Plymouth Roadrunner, and I think it would have been cool to have. Next is a car that I unfortunately don't have any pictures of. It's the 1992 Okura 300 RS W Sportback, which was going to be a wagon variant of the 300 RS that used to be in game. I think it's a shame that we never got this, as the 300 RS was an already good-looking sedan, but a wagon variant would have made it even cooler. Next is a van from a fictional brand that might seem a bit familiar to you. It's the 1996 Acadia Arnold, which was a cargo and passenger van somewhat reminiscent, but better looking, to the Ford Aerostar. And if that brand sounds familiar to you, it's because there was an Acadia vehicle that was just recently removed called the TSR. I know Bluezilla is focusing on the Western brand, but it would be cool to get a fictional classic minivan like this under the Western nameplate. Next is a really cool off-roader that I wish made it to Greenville. It's the 1996 Acadia Hill, and there was a rebadged version called the Urban Tourer that was planned as well. It's obviously extremely reminiscent to the 3rd generation Range Rover, but this would have been really nice to have, as we still don't have the 3rd gen Range Rover yet. Next is a really cool classic Grand Tourer or sports car. It's the 1996 Okura 400S. It's one of the more original looking Okuras, but the body is based on a Eunos Cosmo. Okura was a really cool brand with great ideas, and this would have been a cool addition. Next is a rebadged Okura 300 RS from a fictional brand that never made it to Greenville. It's the 1996 Radiant Leader. I personally don't like it as much as the Okura, but the Radiant has a more Japanese look as opposed to the European looks of the Okura. Next up is an older generation of a car that was actually added to Greenville. It's the 2005 WM Fandom. I personally think that it is a lot better looking than the Fandom that was added, and it would actually fit in with the current lineup. They just recently added the 1st generation Mamba, so why not this as well? Next up is a cool 5-cylinder Japanese supercar. It's the 2016 Acadia XNS-R. I still think it's unfortunate that we only had one Acadia in Greenville, as some of these that are on this list are extremely cool. Next is a tiny little coupe with the same ethos as the Miata and the Lotus Elise. It's the 2017 Acadia Flasher, and it was going to come with a flat 6 engine, which would have been a giant engine for one of these. I think this is one of the best looking Acadias, and it's a shame that it never was added. Next is probably the weirdest and quirkiest fictional car on this list. It's the 2019 Acadia X50. It's obviously based on the Toyota CHR body, but with Acadia styling and the typical performance cosmetic enhancements. This was not going to require a Game Pass, so it would have been really interesting to see so many of these driving around at the beginning of the revamp. Next are 2 supercars that are rebadges of each other. They are the 2019 Acadia XSC and the 2019 Radiant TX. I prefer the Radiant's looks, but they're both pretty original looking even though they're based on the NSX body. Next is a 16-cylinder Italian hypercar. It's the 2019 Agnér Relampàgo X. It's very obviously based on a Koenigsegg, but this would have been extremely cool to have as well. You probably have seen this next car before, but it's the 2019 Caseus E6. You may know this already, but the Caseus brand was completely designed by Hunter, including the E2 hatchback that's still in game. It wasn't as original of a design as the E2 though, so I'm fine with it not ever coming. Next is probably my least favorite WM design. It's the 2019 WM Python. At this time, Automation didn't have any great crossover bodies, so it was hard to make a decent looking car, and that's what happened here. Next is basically the sedan version of the WM Snake, similar to the Mamba that's currently in game. It's the 2020 WM Manikit S, R, and XR, and it was supposed to be a budget-oriented sedan very similar to the Jetta, just like the Mamba. However, I find it interesting that it was built on the same body as the Acadia TSR and WM Panther, as it's weird for 2 brands to have 2 cars with the exact same ethos. And finally, this is the last fictional car on this list. It's the 2022 WM Canine E4MX, and it seems it was unfortunately scrapped right after Bluezilla started to disapprove of his old cars. I still think this looks pretty modern and would fit in with their current lineup, and it would be interesting to have a fully electric muscle car like this, but I assume there will be a replacement for it eventually. So now let's move on to the cars that were actually finished but were never added, starting with the 1987 Lada Signet. Now the Signet was the Canadian import version of the Lada Riva, and it's obviously old enough to import, so I'm not sure why this was never added. It would obviously need a remodel before they do, but it would be great to get an Aftabus in the future. Next car is a really cool classic Grand Tour with a rotary Winkle engine. It's the 1991 Eunos Cosmo Type S and E20B. This was actually back when they were pondering about adding imports, so they were actually planning on making this a limited. Unfortunately, this still hasn't came, but it'd be great to have in the near future. Next car is a performance SUV concept that never made it to Greenville. It's the 2002 Ford SVT Thunder, which was basically the Lightning version of the Expedition. It would have been cool if we got it both in real life and in game, but hopefully we'll get it eventually. Next is the pickup truck version of the last car. It's the 2003 Ford SVT Lightning, and I've actually seen leaks of this truck circulating recently. as a 10th gen F-150 remodel is planned. Next is Albert's Cool Van. Now this existed in GV3 back when Albert's content was aimed more at older teens, but now since most of his videos are aimed towards a younger demographic, I don't think the devs are fans any longer. Albert's Cool Van did exist in GV3, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the first limited ever. Next is probably the car I want most on this list. It's the 2005 Chrysler ME412 M120 Proto. It used the same Mercedes-Benz 6-liter V12 engine that's in the Zonda, and it was going to have 4 turbochargers. I wish it was actually put into production, but it wasn't, due to Mercedes not wanting them to make a car quicker than their SLR since they had a merger at the time, and possibly budget issues as well. Aside from that, the model is actually fairly good, and I hope one is added to Greenville eventually. Next car is a surprising one. It's the 2006 Chevrolet Corvette Z06. Now I say it's surprising because I'm really not sure why it wasn't added. The model was basically better than everything else in the revamp, and the tune and everything was actually finished, as LG made a POV drive video on it. I'm not sure what happened, but hopefully we can get a C6 sometime in the future. Next vehicle is the first semi on this list. It's the 2006 Mitsubishi Fuso FE140. Now I know the devs were initially skeptical about adding semis and fear that people would block roads, but we've been able to turn collisions off since the start of the revamp, and we've had buses for a long time, which are as long as or even longer than semis. Thankfully, they're planned now, but hopefully we'll get a Fuso in the future. The next vehicle is another semi. It's the 2007 International DuraStar 4300 box truck. The tow truck that's in-game dates back to these DuraStar models all the way from January 2020, but yet we still don't have these. It would be great if the devs created an interactive delivery job similar to Ultimate Driving's, but that might be planned since semis are planned. The next vehicle is another DuraStar, but this time it's the 2007 International DuraStar 4300 CIT, a Crisis Intervention Team. We still don't have any armored vehicle of any kind in Greenville, but it would be cool for the many different police stations that exist in-game. The next car is a fictional high-performance version of the Mark V Jetta. It's the 2007 Volkswagen RGT. Sure, we have the fictional RVR6 in Greenville now, but the design of it has changed quite a bit, and I'm not sure if it'll stick around once the Mark V Jetta, Rabbit, and GTI get a remodel. Next is another high-performance Volkswagen that was actually going to be a limited. It's the 2015 Volkswagen Golf R420. Even though it only has a 5-cylinder engine, it was apparently pretty overpowered. Judging by the design of it, I thought it was some concept, but about 5 years ago, Volkswagen was planning on making an even higher performance version of the Golf R with a 5-cylinder called the R420, but it was cancelled for some reason. Next car was one of the only limiteds in GV3, back when limiteds didn't come in almost every single update. It's the 2019 Dodge Journey Hellcat Red-Eye, and it had the same 707 horsepower 6.2-liter Hellcat engine as the 2018 Challenger Hellcat Red-Eye, and as you could imagine, it was extremely overpowered. We still haven't gotten a replacement for this, but I would imagine that it could come again if the Journey ever does get a remodel. Some of you might remember this next one, as it was one of the most sought-after vehicles of the revamp, but it never came, and still hasn't. It's the 2021 Tesla Semi Founder Series. This was probably the most hyped vehicle of the revamp, but they had concerns of adding semis for quite a while. Now that semis are planned again, there's a good chance it could be added eventually, but there's no definite guarantee. The next one was the Cyberpunk 2077 inspired vehicle, as this was right after it came out. It's the 2077 Tesla Super Cybertruck, and it had some visual enhancements that sorta reference the game. There isn't much info about this thing, but they were actually planning on making this a limited. There are plenty of other cars out there that haven't been added to Greenville, but there's a good chance you've already seen those since a few YouTubers have made a similar type of video. However, they likely got their information from future updates posts, and all of the cars you see on this list are from a very old version of the Greenville Revamp Trello. Speaking of that, there's a link to the Trello somewhere in the description below if you want to check it out yourself. This was an extremely long video, but hopefully you guys discovered at least a few new cars that you've never seen before. I'll see you guys soon. Later.